Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm sad to say that we are going to be suspending the podcast indefinitely because we have become millionaires off of our Patreon. So thank you to everybody who made that possible. Wow, that was easy. Connor, how are you doing?
Oh my God. Well, hello everybody. My name is Connor, aka Han Velsing, and I'm very happy to be here with my ever so illustrious, apparently millionaire co-host, Gabe
Illustrious and
Tice.
rich.
Illustrious and rich.
Yes, that's important to me.
So I'm glad you took a break from pulling a jumping into your pile of money like Richie Rich, but what are we doing here today?
I don't know. I guess we can talk about some random movie that nobody cares about. Why don't we talk about Van Helsing? That's a movie that nobody cares about. Yeah.
Then my name is very fitting then. My Han Velsing alternate name tonight's gonna work in our favor, isn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of a weird coincidence. I know that it's kind of creepy.
I bought the psychic ability with all the money that we made.
So yeah, Van Helsing, 2004, directed by Stephen Sommers, starring Hugh Jackman, was meant to be the first in a franchise that didn't work out. It's a story that the Universal Monster brand is very familiar with now. It happened again with the Wolfman, which we talked about, of course. Then it happened with the Mummy. And now they're just doing random remakes. Like the Invisible Man remake has nothing to do with the Mummy. And I think that's how it's going to be for a while.
Well, I hate to cut you off there.
Really?
But hope is not lost. Well, first of all, I do want to highlight, because I put it in my notes, I have to read it out. It did make $300 million on a $160 to $170 million budget. So it wasn't a complete failure, but it did not make what they thought it would make.
It did not make enough to justify their expectations.
Getting into my history, it's been a long time coming to cover a movie like this. What is your history with Van Helsing, since this was indeed your pick?
So I was always aware of this movie because I grew up on the Universal Monster movies. Those were really my childhood, that and superhero movies. So I was always aware of it, but I never saw it as a kid because already I was kind of a snob when it came to CGI. So even me being 5 years old and seeing the trailer was like, I don't think this looks right. This doesn't, and I was such a purist for those classic interpretations, Boris Karloff, Lon Chaney Jr. So the idea of a modern thing almost felt like it was stealing those characters away. And I don't know, it was not something I was keen on as a kid. So ironically, it wasn't until adulthood that my curiosity really got piqued. I do enjoy The Mummy, and I've been fascinated with The Mummy's resurgence to become a classic. So I was like, okay, so the same director who made The Mummy, he made this big tribute to Universal Monsters. Okay, let's check it out. And I was very pleasantly surprised. Low expectations can do that. I don't know how I would have felt seeing this, opening weekend, but I had a really good time with it. And I really want to defend it, not just as its own movie, but, as a companion piece to The Mummy, because to kind of set the stage, I don't get why people love The Mummy and shit on this movie so much.
What do you say we get into the good on this movie? Do you think we should start talking about it?
Yeah, because I had a hard time limiting it to just 3. I have a lot of good to say about this, and I have very little bad. So I'm excited.
I had a tough time narrowing both categories down, actually. So I'm really excited to get into that. But I guess I'll kick us off here with an easy one, and I might be a little bit controversial too, but I actually really dig the look of Frankenstein in this movie.
Frankenstein's monster.
I know. Everybody's gonna say it, Frankenstein's monster, but
No, but I agree with you. And please tell me more because I'm glad I'm not alone in this.
well, I just thought like, look, at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with the old design of Frankenstein, but when you're making a Frankenstein's monster, but when you're when you're making a movie like this, you have to think about what things need to be modernized and what things don't need to be modernized. I think they did a good job overall with the creatures. I think somewhat of making them look modern and fun, but they didn't lose that old school style in a
No,
way.
he's still obviously the Frankenstein monster.
Yes, and I think I appreciated that because first of all, like that cool electric shit going on in his head was super cool. I love that he has this sort of steam powered hydraulic leg
That
that
was like
helps
my
him
favorite
walk.
part. Yeah.
Um, and just like the cloak, it's almost like I'm gonna do it early. Yep, I'm gonna do it early. It's almost
Like
like
Rob
Michael
Zombie's
Myers,
Halloween
Rob Zombie's
2.
Halloween
Yeah.
2 meets Frankenstein,
But you know,
Frankenstein's monster.
when we talked to Flopbuster about Halloween 2, I actually said, oh, Rob's version of Michael kind of reminds me of the Frankenstein monster from those Universal movies. So, in a way, that kind of comes back around to the fact that I think that Rob was taking influence from the same thing that Stephen Sommers is paying tribute here. And
And
I
modernizing
love
it well.
he modernized it well. He kept the gothic uh, feel and the tragedy of that character. And
Yes.
I want to savor my thoughts because I'm really going to get into this later. But overall, Frankenstein monster here is indicative of just a thing I love about this movie in general.
Yeah, I wanted to put him in his point alone because there are some modernizations that I do appreciate as well. You know, like I dig the looks of I like how the werewolves look.
I
I
love how
like
they
that they,
transform.
yeah, I like how they transform. I like how they look overall. You know, there's some things that we can discuss about that. But the design itself wasn't bad. The design itself of how the vampires turn into wasn't bad for me.
Mhm.
I thought it was a cool way to modernize it and keep it fun without it being silly. So yeah, but the Frankenstein's monster I thought was the shining example of how you take a character, keep some of the things that made that character great, but modernize it in the best way possible. So that's going to be my first point of the good, and I'd like to hear if I can hear your first point in the good.
Sure. And I'll just start by saying that I'm going to use a word that people are probably going to laugh at. Wit. I think the screenwriting has a lot of wit to it.
Oh,
I think the dialogue between characters, especially Van Helsing and his sidekick, I think there's actually a lot of really great moments, a lot of really memorable quips, and it makes sense because this was written by the guy who wrote The Mummy, and what people love about that movie is the banter, the one-liners, and all of that. And there's a couple of choices that Stephen Sommers made that I just think really adds to the fact that this is really a vision here, of somebody who knew the classics but wanted to, bring his own huge, grandiose style to. So, for example, when Van Helsing goes to save Kate Beckinsale at that big party, um, it turns out everybody in that ballroom is a vampire. And that was a great twist. And you don't see a whole lot of, cleverness like that in these big budget studio monstrosities. So I thought this was a pretty witty film overall. I mean, there's things with the plot that we can get into, but to me, plot is separate. Just the tone of the movie, the character interactions, and the way he used tropes overall, I liked the cleverness of it.
yeah, that's going to lead to my first or my second point in the good in just a moment. But to go off of what you said, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some problems I have with the writing, and like you said, I think you have to separate the two parts of that, the two segments of what makes up the writing of a
Mhm.
film. because one side of it, I don't know that it's done as well, and that's something we'll get into a little later. But the other side, what you just highlighted, I think is done perfectly. I mean, it makes you like a lot of the characters, and I think like, let's be real. Stephen Sommers took a lot of shit that worked in The Mummy and put it in this one. Quite literally just taking the character of Benny from The Mummy and putting
Making
makeup
him
on him and
Igor.
making him Igor. I mean,
But
it's the
something about
same
that
guy and
really
clearly the
worked
same
for
guy.
me. You know,
But
I
it
know it
did.
was the same actor, and
Yes.
that's
And it
another
felt
thing.
the same too. It,
Yeah,
it felt like Benny as Igor.
it felt similar. I don't know. It felt like Stephen Sommers knew what he liked. He knew what
Yes.
he wanted, and it felt like this was the movie he always wanted to make, and he was ready to make it. You know, he knew the actors he wanted, and I'm not saying he doesn't make any mistakes, because I mean he does, and we'll talk about it. But
Yeah.
I can tell that this was something that he was building up to, and that's kind of where my positives come in. Is like, this guy seemed really prepared to take this material on.
Yes, and some of that cleverness does play into that too. I mean, this is clearly one of those films that he thought out a lot of it,
Mhm.
mostly on the dialogue side. Some of the dialogue, I think, with the more horror characters didn't work as well. I think there's a shining example of one that I'll get into when we start talking about that. But
Hmm.
overall, it's one of those movies that the character interactions are so fun most of the time, and when they're not fun, they're still just they work. And especially with the character of Carl, his little sidekick, just everything that Hugh Jackman says to this guy works so well. Van Helsing and Carl's dynamic was awesome.
Yeah. And
One of the
side
best
note,
parts for me.
doesn't that guy kind of look like Jim from The Office?
He's got like a
Hair
gym.
for sure.
Uh, oh, I had something for this. I didn't write it down. There's a British actor that I'm thinking of. It's like if him and Jim from The Office had a love child. John Krasinski is the Jim's name, but I can't remember it. Either way, I agree with you. I agree with your point, and that leads to my second pro here, which is there are a lot of characters and actors in this film that I just love. Uh, First of all, Hugh Jackman. I mean, I have to mention Hugh Jackman and what he did for the character of Van Helsing. He's the definitive Van Helsing of my childhood. I want to see him, like you said, return if they ever reboot this. I don't think they will bring him back, but I'd like to see it. Kate Beckinsale, man, she like shaped my how my childhood crushes would turn out from this movie onward. I mean,
Yeah.
man, what does Pete Davidson have that I don't? But anyways,
Well, they're not. They're
I'm
not.
kidding. Happily married
The
people,
happily
but
married man said.
happily married. Just joking. But no, in all seriousness, there's so many characters and actors in this that I like. I really like Kate Beckinsale overall and her character. I
Kate
really
Beckinsale's
like.
a really good actress. It's
She
like,
is great.
and you
I
know,
love
when
her.
when people talk about like the fact that Kate Beckinsale is sexy, it's not just her looks. I mean, she has the it factor as a performer. She has the swagger. She has the confidence. It's like, you know, Hugh Jackman. I mean, he's a great looking guy, but that's not just why people think he's like one of the sexiest men ever. He's got it.
Well, that's why they make it where they are. And honestly, like, I don't think people give Kate Beckinsale the kudos that she deserves, because let's be
No.
real, she completely carried the Underworld franchise. I mean, completely carried those movies, and they made a ton of money. Most of them did.
Yeah.
The franchise as a whole made a ton of money. So Kate Beckinsale deserves more credit. I think she was great in this. I think Hugh Jackman was obviously great in this. The actor that played Carl, I think, was fantastic. He was funny at the right moments, and he delivered his lines so perfectly. And there's that hilarious moment where he saves the girl, and she goes, "Whatever I can do to repay you." And then he whispers to her, she goes, "But you are a monk." He goes, "Actually, I'm just a friar." And then they go and bang. It's fucking
Yeah.
amazing.
Then he gets some, and that was actually kind of cool. That
Yes.
it was not a case of like, oh, this guy just exists to make Hugh Jackman look cooler.
You know what? And that's a big reason why I like him, because he's a sidekick that's actually a sidekick that matters in the context of the story. First of all, he's not just a loser that like is the butt of every joke. A lot of the smaller roles did great. Even Benny. I'm gonna call him Benny. I'm not even gonna call him Kevin J. O'Connor. I'm gonna call him Benny. because he's Benny in this, man. But even he did great. I love when he's just there, that little subtle moment where he's walking through and he doesn't think anybody's around. He goes, Igor, do this, Igor, do that.
Yeah.
This is so like and that's the thing I want to say too, and I wanted to bring this up with the Carl character is that say what you want about Stephen Sommers, but he knows how to write a good comic relief character because Jonathan was the same way in the Mummy movies. He's the guy that you laugh at. He's the guy that's the butt of some jokes and he's funny at the right moments, but he also matters in the context of the story. And that's what Carl does in this movie. He matters. He's not just there as the butt of the joke all the time. He quite literally is the reason that Kate Beckinsale was able to get the cure to Van Helsing. So it's like they matter, and that's what I appreciate about Stephen Sommers is that all of the characters that he writes that are supposed to be in the story do feel central to the story. It feels like without him, it's not the same.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it adds to the charm of the movie that everybody has a role in the story. Everybody was well cast with actors who played the parts well and with affection. That's going to be a word I use a couple times, affection, because I just feel like that runs throughout the whole thing. Just like everybody loved making this. That's how I feel.
And it felt that way watching it,
mm-hmm.
which leads me, I think is a good thing. And that leads me to my question of what is the second pro that you would like to introduce?
All right. This, I guess, is going to be kind of contradicting some of people's complaints about this movie.
Ooh.
I love the production design. I mean, I could say I love the look, but there's obviously some things about the special effects that we'll have to talk about later. But the sets, the costumes and wardrobe, the props, all of Van Helsing's badass gadgetry,
color palette.
The cinematographer I think did a great job too. It's very different than the Mummy though. The Mummy, that's set on the desert, that is, has oranges and tungsten and everything. This this is
great to hear that as a descriptor. That was amazing.
I don't know. I mean,
no, it works. It works
when
perfectly.
You talk about like things like cinematography, you just start to pull out random words.
You're right. Yeah, I've been there.
But this one, people might call it murky, but I still think it was actually very just gothic and dark. And I still think there was like a healthy amount of saturation. I didn't feel like I was just looking at dirt or a cloud. There was just
AVP Requiem.
Exactly. There was just a great visual appeal to it. It was gothic in that kind of, cartoony, safe for kids way, but it was sincere and it was made by people who clearly knew what they were doing,
Yes.
So overall, I just thought this was a great movie to look at. It had blemishes, and we'll talk about that again. You always have to, put that disclaimer up before people start like getting mad at you in the comments. Like, what about this?
Actually,
we'll talk about it. But just overall, sets, cinematography. And you know what? This isn't visual, but I have to throw the score in there. That totally added to the mood and to the atmosphere and just made you feel like you were on an adventure. And that's something that Stephen Sommers is clearly gifted at. In fact, it kind of makes me wish he had made an Indiana Jones movie or something. He's so gifted at it.
I agree with most of I agree with everything that you said. So, I got to say, one thing that I appreciated about this is that there's so many times where like during the day, it's like a warm tone to tell you that it's daytime. And then at nighttime, it's like bluish tones. It's like, that's how you distinguish day and nighttime for the colors that are used, even if it's like, a little cloudy or whatever it is. But this movie does something really interesting where I think like during the day, it's very like blue undertones like they would do at nighttime. But at night, they do this like strange sort of green undertone to the shots and the composition of everything.
Which was very popular at the time.
It was very popular at the time. It's one of those things that honestly, like, I expected to have a complaint about it because I remember it as a kid and I was like, I feel like that's not something that would age well with me. But it did. I felt like it added a lot to how the story was presented because movies like this you don't really see look like that. It's very much cut and dry. It's blacks and blues and sometimes some tones of yellows with like the moon and stuff, but that's really all that you'll get. So I appreciate it in this film, and I appreciate everything that you highlighted there. It's got a look that feels in line with the Mummy movies, but it doesn't feel like a copy, and that's important, I think, when you are establishing what
Very.
could have potentially been a universe.
Mhm.
It's in line, but it's not a ripoff, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's interesting that this really could be in the universe of the Mummy. I mean, there's nothing to say that this isn't. I feel like all of the characters would blend in perfectly into the same universe. So I don't know. In my head canon, I guess this is a little Stephen Sommers universe.
I would agree. I thought that as soon as I watched this. The one thing I will say is that I think the score overall was really good, but there were a few times that I don't think it worked with the tone or what they were going
It
for.
was different.
But
It
that
was
was the
really
thing. Is
different.
like, yeah, I think
It was like
the
a
one,
Spanish guitar
yeah,
sort of
and
sound.
that's the one that stuck with me and that really hit that spot in my brain. But there were a few times that I really hoped, like, the sucker in me. I talked about this in the Wolfman episode. It's like I really liked the integration of like the violins and the
Yeah, but that
strings
was
that
a
you associate
horror
with
movie.
monsters.
That's
Yes,
the thing. And this is gallantry. This
right.
is
It does
bravado.
have
And
more elements of horror than The Mummy did, though, which I appreciated. It felt there were more horror elements in this than there were in The
I don't
Mummy, which
know.
I think was the best way to do it. I think this is the movie you do take in a slightly more horror centric direction because The Mummy, I don't think, is ever going to be scary. That's just me.
You mean as a concept?
Yes, I think the Mummy is one of the more. I think the Mummy is the worst of the Universal monsters. So if you're gonna make a Mummy movie, you make it like Stephen Sommers did,
I don't know if I agree with that.
and that's
Um,
fair. I know it's a hot take a little bit because people love the Mummy movie, the original, but
yeah, Karis the Mummy, both Universal and the Hammer version. I think he still works as like a slasher villain. Everybody's like, well, the Mummy's so slow. How can people catch up? Excuse me, you saw Halloween number 13, okay? You saw Michael drags his ass Myers get out of bed
oh
to
man,
meander around Haddonfield again. I almost said Hollywood because, well, let's be
well,
real.
he does an H20 kind of.
He does kind of go Hollywood.
Yeah, yeah.
I can just imagine him driving down with a convertible, sunglasses on,
He's listening
hand
to
hanging
Snoop
out the
Doggy
side.
Dogg.
No, he'd be listening to Buster Rhymes.
He would be listening to Busta Rhymes, getting ready for his big battle. But
That's the thing.
nevertheless, I
You
agree
know,
with most of the things that you said there for your pro.
okay, I'm glad you stopped me before I kept going on with these dumb jokes.
Oh no.
I was ready to make the whole episode just Buster Rhymes jokes. The gift that keeps on giving.
We got our chance to do that. By the way, anybody listening, head over to our Patreon. By the time this comes out, we have both of our Halloween specials out. The second of which covers Halloween Resurrection.
Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, and Halloween Resurrection. So if you want to see how anybody on planet Earth could like either of those movies, check those out. But back to today's episode. It's your turn, Connor. Hit me with another pro.
Yeah, honestly, we designate 3 to keep the show condensed as possible to make the viewing experience better for everybody at home. And so my number 3 is going to be a little bit of a cheap one. And in the immortal words of my co-host Gabe here, one of the least film bro things I've ever said. But man, it's just a bunch of fucking monsters, dude. It's rad. Like that's so cool. The fact that this is like the Avengers of monster movies is fucking awesome to me. I don't think it's treated like it should have been. If you're gonna do a concept like that, I think now that Avengers has happened, having a movie like that would be really cool. But there's really just like this and
dude.
Monster Squad that are like shining examples of fun experiences that have a big group of monsters, and I appreciate both of those for that.
I'm so grateful that this was made before the MCU. I mean, oh my God.
I
Oh my
think it
God.
would have been really bad as far as like an overall universe to try to use the MCU model to do
I think it
these.
would have been bad for the tone, for the
Oh, well, that's a
style.
big thing. Yeah. The
Yeah.
style of the MCU movies would have never worked in this universe.
But they would have tried it.
They would have tried it. Oh my God. They might
Absolutely.
still try it. Having James Wan attached makes me pretty happy, but they might still try it. And I hope they
I don't
don't,
know.
but we'll see.
Yeah, it's a bunch of monsters. And you know what? That actually goes right into my third pro.
Oh,
And
hell
this is
yeah.
a big one for me. I love how all of our monsters are represented. I think they're uh, accurate, but modern. I think it's affectionate, but not slavish. Again, Stephen Sommers allowed himself to reinvent these monsters, bring his own style onto them. I mean, the idea actually of his werewolf transformation, where the thing actually tears at you from the inside, that's something that it feels like it would belong in a really gnarly, hard R werewolf movie. But he came up with it for this, this kids movie, which is hilarious. And it's kind of a bummer that we actually don't get to see that idea fully realized. But still, I mean, you can't say he doesn't have really interesting ideas for these monsters, but none of that ever overshadows or undermines what we all love about these characters. And actually, the Frankenstein monster here is more true to Mary Shelley's vision than the Boris Karloff version, which is really interesting. I bet a lot of people were shocked when this monster turned out to be articulate.
I know that even this time, knowing that I was still shocked they made that decision.
I think it's a great moment, though. It kind of reminds me of when Caesar talks in Rise of the Planet of the Apes.
That's an interesting point. I
Maybe
didn't think
not
about
as
that.
epic, but it's still like this big moment, and it's a great introduction to the character. I mean, even just that opening scene, which I know we're limiting ourselves to three pros, but that's my unofficial fourth pro. I love that entire black and white
Oh,
opening.
me too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Fantastic. Great idea to make it black and white.
exactly. And I'm surprised they even let him do that. But I guess he had the mummy clout. Um, poor Rob Zombie.
Mummy,
He
mummy
probably
clout.
stares at that
Oh
in
man,
envy, like,
you motherfuckers.
really? You let him get away with this shit. So, but that ending where he's at the top of the burning mill and he just screams out, "Why?" That is Frankenstein's monster. Like in one moment, they have captured everything that is poetic about that character. And then you have Dracula. Um, I'll say I was very off put at first, and then I kind of grew to love this version. I think he was hammy in all the right ways. Maybe some people are annoyed this isn't a darker, more brooding version. To me, it was really, really refreshing how kind of buoyant and witty this version was, and to see an actor just having such a good time playing him. So I don't know, it worked for me. And then Dracula's Brides, Igor, all of that. Just in terms of the writing and the performances, I'm a big fan.
You know, something that you brought up at the end there is something I want to highlight real quick because it goes with the pro that you just said there. I saw a lot of people shitting on like the Brides of Dracula. I loved them.
I thought they were
They
awesome.
did. Yeah, I thought they were great. They added a lot. I think they did what they were supposed to do. The main one I think was fantastic. I loved her performance, and as a kid, she definitely made an impression. I'll say that much. But
I'm not
now
going to ask you
watching
what
the
kind of
movie,
impression.
no, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I wouldn't. But anyways, no. But now that I can appreciate movies like this, the fact that they're not just completely useless and they're sort of like doing all of his bidding, I really like that aspect. The one thing I'll say I didn't really like about the Frankenstein's monster is that he's a little too dramatic for the tone they were going for the movie. And that's the one part that makes me like, I know it fits the tragic backstory a lot, but there's one part where he's kind of being risen in this block of ice and he sort of does this like, and I was like, oh, what the fuck are you doing, man? What
I
are you
don't
doing?
know, man. I thought
What
that
are you
fit.
doing? I don't know. I felt like it
This
was
is
too
a
dramatic for
hammy
the tone they were
movie.
going for. But I that was supposed to be an emotional moment, and I didn't like that it was that it
Okay.
felt like it was over dramatized. That being said, though, I agree with most of everything that you said. There's the way that most of the monsters are treated in this movie is awesome. The werewolf lore is kind of cool. I like that there's this element of control and hierarchy in there.
Yeah. Now it does get a little convoluted.
Oh, I have something to say in the bad that has to do
I
with some
think
of that.
I think we both do. So we have to put a little asterisk there. I mean,
Yes.
just looking at the werewolves, just how they operate, that mythology is awesome. It's great. I like have no problem with that. Their relationship with Dracula, yeah, it gets convoluted. I'll just say that.
Yeah, so yeah, but I dig what you said there, and I'm curious if you wanted to highlight anything real quick before we head over to the bad section.
I mean, I highlighted that opening sequence, and that really got me pumped up for the movie. As somebody who walked in skeptical, I was like, it's kind of like watching Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. And you're expecting a shit show, like everybody said, and you're like, wait, these first 15 minutes are like, this is like some of the best version of this type of thing that I've ever seen, So this was like um, the Universal monster movie that we all deserve. I want to see a whole movie like this. We will never get to see that, but God bless Stephen Sommers for giving us what he could and giving us like a perfect encapsulation of what we love about those movies. As a super nerd, this is the opposite of Halloween where I'm a neutral observer. I love and adore these characters. So the fact that I love that so much, it speaks even more to me. It matters even more to me.
The intro, I think, I'm glad that you brought it up because it's sort of like the fourth point in the good for both of us because
Mm-hmm.
it was, when you talked about wanting to do this movie and it popped up back into my head. We had talked about this pretty early on in the show. I mean, like a couple episodes in, this had floated as an idea, and that was the first place my head went. And then everything started flowing back. The vampire women and Kate Beckinsale and Hugh Jackman and
Yeah, the
werewolves
sexy
and
vampire
Frankenstein
women
and
and the
yeah,
sexy Kate
everything. I mean,
Beckinsale and the sexy
and
Hugh Jackman.
but no, like everything about in the score, that Spanish guitar thing that was in there, that's playing in my head as soon as you brought it up. So the beginning being the first thing that pops into my head is a perfect example of why it's so great. It's the first thing that you think of if you came away liking anything from this movie. I guarantee it's probably that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the good thing to close the good off with, and I think we should jump into the bad. And I'm gonna let you go first since this was your pick. I'm gonna let you beat up on it first here. What do you got for the bad?
All right, Connor. I don't know if I'm gonna offend you with this. Um, it's not that he's bad, but
Uh-oh.
I am not a big fan of Hugh Jackman in this movie.
Ooh, okay.
I just think it was a case of kind of uninspired casting. Hugh Jackman had just done the first couple of X-Men movies. He was a huge action star, huge movie star, and it feels like they got him for that rather than anything he might do to make the role his own. Compare him with Brendan Fraser, who is irreplaceable in those first couple of Mummy movies. And Hugh Jackman, despite being, one of our most talented actors, and despite giving us a truly iconic performance as Wolverine, he just didn't do anything to make this role his own to me. And a big problem is that I think he is just kind of doing the Wolverine thing again. I mean, Van Helsing literally has amnesia. And at some point, he and Dracula have that big moment of, do you remember me? And it's very reminiscent of X-Men 2. And to be honest, this Van Helsing just feels kind of like a subdued Wolverine for a lot of it. So I just kind of wish they had gone with a bit more of an interesting casting choice. Find somebody who's not an obvious action star or not an obvious leading man, and let them really, transform the role, like take the character in a new direction. Because Hugh Jackman, to be honest, he's not bad. It's just not the most interesting direction they could have gone.
Interesting. I don't know if it's just because I watched this so much growing up, but I can't picture somebody else in the role for this film, Like
Yeah.
this is, if you're making this movie, I see him as Van Helsing. So I really don't have much to say against that. No, I'm not offended. I can tell you that. But I don't have much to say because I don't disagree when it comes to like maybe there could have been a more inspired choice, a less obvious decision for the character of Van Helsing. But at the same time, I thought it worked well, and I don't have any complaints about it. I thought he gave a good performance, and that's, I don't know. I don't really have. I feel kind of boring. I expected when you said that to be like, okay, maybe I can play it up and joke a little bit, but I really don't. I kind of agree with what you said there, as far as like there could have been a better, I guess, more inspired choice, but I like what we got, and I can't see anything different.
Yeah. I don't know. I was just picturing like what if they got, Michael Cera to be the lead in this? I don't know. You know what I mean? Just like, what if they really thought outside the box? And that's the thing about Brendan Fraser, even though he's a big, handsome guy, he's not an action star archetype the way Hugh Jackman is. He really brought you okay,
I know you're not just gonna keep talking like you didn't just say Michael Cera.
well, if you watched a little movie called Scott Pilgrim versus the World, you would know that he is our greatest action star, actually.
But that works because of what Scott Pilgrim is. He's not playing a big bad Van Helsing vampire hunter.
No, but can you imagine?
He'd be better for Stan Helsing than he would be for Van Helsing.
Don't you say that shit. Don't bring up Stan
I'm sorry,
Helsing
that really tickled me, man. I don't just of all the actors, I did not expect you to go Michael Cera. Oh, man.
Yeah, obviously, but you got to remember, when they made the first Mummy, Brendan Fraser was known for George of the Jungle.
Yes, and Airheads, and
exactly. He was
Encino Man.
Yeah, he was known as a dopey guy. Now, he had a couple of dramatic roles that were very excellent but underseen, like his amazing performance in Gods and Monsters, which, if you want to talk a true, not just homage to the Universal monsters, but a true deconstruction and analysis of what those movies mean culturally, go watch Gods and Monsters. But that ain't this. This is just hammy blockbuster fun. I think Hugh Jackman is just a little dry. He's the only person who doesn't seem to be having that much fun. Even Kate Beckinsale, she gets to carry around a sword and be all hot and sexy with it, gets to speak with a questionable Romanian accent, and it's all in good fun. Hugh Jackman is just being an action hero.
Well, I hate to come back at you with the classic, I hope this doesn't offend you.
Okay.
But I'm going to introduce my first point in the bag. Good. And it's that Dracula sucks in this, dude. I hate it. I hate it so much. I hate it so much. As a kid, I didn't have any problems with it. Honestly, like thinking back, the only real thing I remembered about him was one specific scene, and it was in the beginning when he just shows up behind Dr. Frankenstein and he's like, success! That's the only thing I thought of. And I was like, yeah, first of all, Vladislaus Dracula, interesting. I did not like the performance at all. I like the actor. I think he's a good actor. I think he's given us a lot of good performances. I don't think he worked in this role. I don't think his writing, as far, I think he was the character that was written the weakest of all of the characters in this. I think he's the weakest
I'll
portrayal,
agree.
and I could not think of a nice thing to say about the character or the portrayal after the movie, and it was one of the biggest problems I had with it was Dracula. I just put in my notes for the bad here, Dracula sucks. That's all I put, because I think he sucks. Again, love the actor, think he's done a lot of great things, but this was not for me. This is not the portrayal I wanted.
I thought it was funny. I thought it was quite funny and in good humor. I thought it was self-aware camp, which for this type of movie, I'm honestly fine with. It took me a while to get used to the actor and the performance, but when I realized that he knows what he's doing, it hit the way I think Stephen Sommers intended. This is not Christopher Lee or fucking. He's a lot closer to Gary Oldman, who did have that camp quality. But I kind of hate that interpretation because he's surrounded by what's supposed to be a super ultra literary movie. This is a wink and a nod, tongue in cheek type of flick, and I think Dracula just adds to that. I can totally understand why that doesn't work for some people. I mean, it doesn't work as a Dracula interpretation. It's just another element of comedy to me in the movie, and that's the thing. That's why Hugh Jackman stands out to me, because everybody else is like this in my eye. Hugh Jackman is the only person who's not kind of approaching his role with that kind of levity.
That's interesting, because it's interesting because that opinion I fall on the opposite side of, and the
Mhm.
opinion for Dracula you fall on the opposite side of, which is
It's not
interesting.
so opposite because I get where you're coming
No,
from.
and I get what you're saying too about the casting decision, but yeah, that's my first point in the bad. I don't want to harp on the guy too much because, like I said, I do like the actor quite a bit. This performance
Mhm.
wasn't for me. I didn't even really recognize him right away
Mhm.
when watching it, but yeah, that's my first point here. But what would you have for your second point in the bad? I'm curious.
The movie feels too long. It definitely starts to feel too long by the last 20 minutes. The movie, I don't know if he even has a pacing issue. It just has too much. It just has too many start and stops. And for a movie that should be a pretty simple little adventure with monsters, it just tries too hard to be almost like a Lord of the Rings-esque epic, and that's not what Van Helsing was built to be.
Yeah, the second point, the bad that I have is this movie's too long. So exactly what you just
Really?
highlighted
Okay.
there. Yeah,
Cool.
this should not have been a 2 hour film. If you're gonna make a fun blockbuster, sit down and like Gabe from Flopbuster said, you just grab your popcorn and you have fun with it. Don't make it 2 hours long. We talked about that in with Battle Los Angeles. It had the same problem. It just there was several points that the movie should have ended. There were
Yeah.
several things that were introduced that shouldn't have been. The whole I agree with you about the stuff with Van Helsing's backstory. It just didn't matter to me. I do think that the way that they portrayed him fit the film. I would like to see a 2 hour long dramatic horror version of the Van Helsing story. I think that would be very captivating to watch. But with what they did in this one, you can't do a 2 hour epic because it doesn't. This is not the type of movie this is. It's not a 2 hour epic. It's supposed to be a short and sweet, fun movie. And like you said, there's so much that they fit in here as well. One of the things that's very easy to forget is that he quite literally fights and kills Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde at the beginning of the movie. I mean, he does that. He kills Mr. Hyde at the beginning of the film, and then later on in the movie, you sort of forget that by the end of it because so much has happened since then, and it's been so much time since that happens, and I just like you said, it's not even so much a pacing issue, I guess. It's just that they put too much in there, and some of it should have been cut out. Kate Beckinsale's character should have lived. I'm going to stand by that, and that's it.
I really liked the ending though, with her reuniting with her family in the sky. I bet a bunch of people thought that was super corny.
My
I
wife
like
did.
corny.
She hated it.
Yeah, I like
She
corny.
hated it.
Give me corny, okay? Move me. I dare you to make me feel an emotion during a Van Helsing movie.
Do it, pussy. I'm curious, since we both kind of tackled the same point there, what do you have for your third bad?
Yeah, and this is kind of a big one, no doubt. And it's more mixed. I don't want to just say it was all bad, but uh the action scenes left a lot to be desired for me. Part of that is the length. That little attack on the village from the three wives, that goes on way too long. There's cool moments there, but it goes on way too long. And then obviously we're going to talk about the CGI later, but that does not help the fact that I just don't feel any immediacy or any tension from these rubber electronic demons that are attacking faceless extras. And a perfect example of all of this is the confrontation with Mr. Hyde. Again, I think Mr. Hyde's dialogue is great, and I think it should have been way cooler. I kept thinking that like this should be working for me, but it's not, because of the CGI, because it just feels like it never stops. And I just think just the choreography is silly. It's cartoonish. Like Van Helsing shooting Mr. Hyde with his grappling hook, and the way he kind of swings around to land in the perfect place for Mr. Hyde to swing around. It was very cartoonish and not in a fun way. It started to feel a little incompetent. So overall, this is an action movie, and I just did not think that the action did this movie any favors.
Interesting. I think you have a fair point there. Before I go off on it, though, I do just want to say, since we both brought up Mr. Hyde now, at the time of recording this, rest in peace to Robbie Coltrane, the voice actor who played Mr. Hyde.
Are you kidding me? That's who voiced Mr. Hyde?
Yes, that's who voiced Mr. Hyde in this. Rest in peace.
Hagrid voiced Mr. Hyde? Okay.
I thought the character design was interesting for Mr. Hyde, but it's the same thing, the problems that people have with movies that have CG. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about that earlier, but it lowers the stakes in some cases where it's just blatantly obvious. And while I don't think like when you pause the film that the CGI is that bad, and I think for 2004, some of it's actually quite good, there's a lot that is left to be desired. I think The Mummy is a better example of an action adventure that the action works in when certain elements that are similar to elements that we see in this film are implemented. It feels like it works a lot better there than it does here. But I think also part of that is because this movie doesn't feel like it should be the same kind of action epic, like this feels like, of anything, it should be more grounded in the horror stuff. And while I do appreciate that they took that approach with some of the movie, I think where it gets lost is that the action itself tries to be what it is in The Mummy, but it doesn't work in this because it's not that. It's similar, but it's not that. And for me, that's what didn't work about it. I think there are action sequences that I really like. There's actually parts of that village scene that I really like. I love the implementation of, when extras are getting picked up by the vampires, just tossed and just thrown, through buildings and stuff. I think that's a really cool visual. I think when, the vampires come crashing through roofs and stuff, getting shot by Van Helsing, I think that's very cool. But overall, the scene goes on way too long. And a lot of the other action sequences are just so ridiculous and over the top that it doesn't even fit the campiness that the movie has. That scene where, I think back to that scene where Kate Beckinsale is swinging on this huge rope from one side to another, just very slowly. And she gets like the needle tossed to her, and she like it perfectly goes to her, even though there's wind and rain.
I hate that sort of stuff.
There's definitely something that I'm going to get into about that for my third point in the bad, but when I'm talking about what you said, it just I don't completely agree. I do think that like by the end of the movie, I'm mostly fulfilled by the action that I wanted from it, but I'm a little disappointed that it wasn't everything that I was looking for when it came to those sequences. I think they could have capitalized on it a little better, and I'm upset that they didn't do that.
It's just one of those things too where it starts to feel like action for the sake of action. Uh, very few times did I feel like the action scenes had an end goal or a target that kind of gave it all focus. I'm going to go back to the um, attack on the village because that's just a case of these things flying around, trying to kill as many people as they can. Uh, and there was no end goal in sight. I didn't know why they were attacking, and that's kind of a pattern that repeats throughout. Actually, my favorite action sequence does have a very specific objective, and that's the transportation of the Frankenstein monster through the carriages, and that actually leads to one of the more famous shots of the movie, Helsing jumping off the carriage and shooting at that werewolf coming through the fire. That's actually a great shot. That's a badass shot. But then you also get into the entire climax at the ice castle.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it returns to what I was talking about. And this Dracula is funny, but he is not intimidating. So
Not at
watching,
all.
yeah, watching him and Hugh Jackman kind of go at it, there's not a thrill there. And normally I love werewolves and vampires fighting, but when the CGI is as charmless as this, I don't know. I can't really get into it.
Yeah, and like you said, what else is there to say about it? It as I've said in a few episodes now, it is what it is, and there's no getting around it. But I wonder if people can get around this last bad point that I want to bring up before we move on, and that's there are so many convenient inconsistencies or convenient plot points that they just throw in there just because they have nowhere else to go or they have to do it. First of all, the biggest convenient thing that they did in this movie was just what I highlighted there. Kate Beckinsale is swinging on a rope in a rainstorm, and they just perfectly throw this needle like 20 feet, and she catches it. The fact that she goes through everything that she goes through in this movie, but just being put through a bench or something by a werewolf kills her. He doesn't bite her. She's not bleeding anywhere. That kills her. The werewolf thing with Van Helsing, the fact that Dracula controls the werewolves, but if one of them's bold enough to turn against him and kill him, then that's going to end up working out just fine. I don't know why her brother wasn't strong-willed enough against this man he hated so much to not kill him. That's a very big inconsistency that I see in the film. There's so many of these.
I feel like what you're alluding to is really just how convoluted the mythology of this universe is.
And like sometimes it just feels like they just put something in to have a moment, even if it doesn't work in the context of the film or the context of any film. To be honest with you,
no, it was it's built on cliches in a lot of ways. And you'll notice a lot of these moments come through in the action sequences because I think that's where the film gets the most sloppy. I think they do want their trailer shots. Logic be damned. It reminds me way too much of that League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie.
ooh, I'm so glad you brought that up because those are so similar to each other. They're so
Yeah.
similar.
I mean, this is better. It's better. Yeah, it's better.
So.
Sure.
I would say so.
I mean, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is based off of an Alan Moore comic. So,
yeah,
excuse me, graphic novel. So it didn't have any excuse to turn out the way it did, But I think you and I agree. I would say that I was a little bit more forgiving when it came to things like Kate Beckinsale's death, but yeah, obviously you just kind of have to either accept it or not when you get moments like um characters throw. I mean, a really egregious moment is Kate Beckinsale is about to be killed by this by the Dracula's brides, and a sword is tossed to her from off screen. It's like the most awkward shot in the movie. Just kind of like some grip tossed it into Kate Beckinsale's hand, and she stabs it. And it's like then you cut to Carl, who's um like 100 feet below her and probably 100 feet away.
That's another
So
huge moment.
yeah,
Carl's got a great arm. Guy should be a quarterback.
that to me was even more egregious than the needle thing, especially with the way it was filmed. It wasn't even like trying to be cool. It was like, oh shit, we only have 5 minutes left. Okay, we'll do this all in a wide, guys. Just somebody, Kate, just make sure you catch the sword. Okay, now stab her with it. No, don't stab her. Oh well, okay, that's the only take we could do. All right, great work, everybody. It's kind of like that.
Woo! Wrap. This is the last scene we have to film. We're done. No, it's there's just that's why I put down convenient inconsistencies, because it feels like there's so many things about this movie that just felt convenient, and that to me says either lazy or lack of care in certain areas, or maybe you just get so wrapped up that you don't notice these things. I don't know, but whatever it is, I didn't like those moments. I thought it took away from the film in some parts, and even Frankenstein flying through a window to conveniently save the hero, like by that point there had been so many things that were just so convenient throughout the movie that I was like, okay, how many more are we going to see? And sure enough, we saw plenty more. So yeah, it is what it is, like you said, but that's my third point in the bad. That's the last one I have to bring up.
Well, I think that's fair because we have a lot of things to address. People have issues with this movie that we're going to tackle. In some cases, we'll agree. In some cases, we'll defend the movie. But you guys are going to want to stick around after the intermission to hear us talk about this movie's most controversial choices.
Yes, but like my illustrious co-host said, we do have one stop before we get to the audience's problems with the film. So why don't you go ahead, get up from your chair, get out of your car, stop at a gas station, whatever you have to do. Get you a drink, get you a snack, get you some rotisserie chicken. I don't care what it is. I don't care where you go. I don't care what you do. Just make sure when you do so, you take your phone, you take your laptop, you take your tablet, you take your water windmill powered device, and you take it with you to do whatever you're going to do, because ladies and gentlemen, we are taking off, and our next destination is the intermission. Ladies and gentlemen, we have officially landed in the intermission segment. This is, of course, the segment where I take this film we're covering today and I somehow try to connect it back to the previous two films that we covered on this show, not including specials. So, not including specials, the last two that we covered would be Halloween H20 with Victoria Rasmussen from Flopbuster. Very fun guest. If you haven't seen that episode or heard that episode, please go listen or watch. We also covered Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines just before that. So this should be interesting and this should be fun. With that said, let's make some connections. So Van Helsing features actor Will Kemp, who plays Valken. However, Will Kemp also appears in the 2015 sequel, The Scorpion King 4, Quest for Power. This film also features Hulk actor Lou Ferrigno, who himself stars as Hercules in the 1985 film The Adventures of Hercules. This film features actor William Berger, who appeared alongside Django actor Franco Nero in the 1976 film Keoma, one of my favorite Western films, by the way. Franco Nero has had a long and storied career himself, which includes a movie called Letters to Juliet with Amanda Seyfried. Is it Seyfried? Seyfried?
Seyfried.
Seyfried. Never knew how to pronounce her name, so this is the first time I'm getting an answer. But yes, he's in Letters to Juliet with Amanda Seyfried. who herself appeared in Mean Girls with Lindsay Lohan, or Lindsay Lohan, as she pronounces it.
That's true.
Lindsay also starred alongside Halloween H20 actress Jamie Lee Curtis in the 2003 film Freaky Friday. Continuing on, Freaky Friday also featured actress Lorna Scott, who appeared in the Adam Sandler film Bedtime Stories. Adam Sandler also stars in Billy Madison with Bridget Wilson, who herself appears in the 1996 film Unhook the Stars with young Anakin Skywalker actor Jake Lloyd. Jake Lloyd also stars alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger in the holiday classic, yes, I said holiday classic, Jingle All the Way. Arnie also stars in Terminator 3, the subject of episode 9 of this very mother effing podcast. Thank you and good night. Any thoughts?
This is why people are so ready to give us their cold hard cash because of connections like that.
Oh man, you're welcome.
Go to Patreon if you haven't already.
No, yes, go to patreon.com/notthatbad.
No, that was great.
Patreon.com/notthatbad.
That was great.
Oh, thank you. My lungs, thank you for the
I'm getting impatient because I really want to talk about why people don't like this movie and how smug people are when they talk about this movie.
Yeah, let's get into the ugly. Now, getting into the ugly, we talk about what people did not like about this film. Of course, we've talked about it so far. This film did not do what the studio thought it would do. It did not make the money it thought it would make. And currently on Letterboxd, this film sits at a 2.6 out of 5, far below our 3-star mark. Anything below a 3, we will cover on this show. But what did some Letterboxd users think of this particular movie? Well, starting off with a 1.5-star review from Patrick Willems. He says, I've never seen a movie that looks so expensive, also looks so shitty. Probably my favorite, well, definitely my favorite review of the bunch, probably the favorite that I read. It's the review of the week that popped me and made me laugh the hardest. And it was a 1-star review from Sophia, who said, why does Count Dracula have Oompa Loompas? Which I don't know, that made me laugh a lot.
Loompa, Loompa,
yeah.
Toompa Duddy.
Yeah.
This is somewhat a shitty movie.
Well, but yes, those were the reviews that we got from the Letterboxd users. First, before we move on, besides your beef with Patrick Willems, is there anything else you wanted to say about either of those reviews?
Look, I get no, I don't get it. This looks like an expensive movie. Like, do people not understand how much money goes into making sets like this? Hiring this many people for the special effects, hiring Hugh Jackman in in the days of X-Men, and Kate Beckinsale. I think the Underworld series had already been well underway, right?
I think the don't quote me on this, but I think the first Underworld film came out in 2003, so that would have been the year before this.
Look, it's just ironic to me because this movie was considered tacky looking at the time, but honestly, I think it looks way more artistic and stylish than like the most praised and well-received MCU movie. I have to be honest. I mean, this looks more like a comic book than any of those movies.
Well, we're certainly going to hear a lot about that. And one thing that I want to say is, though, I think some of, at least the second review, this movie costs $160 million. Some of that doesn't just come from how the movie looks as far as cinematography, because we do have to think the general audience isn't always looking at those specifics in the film and having that be one of the points of contention. But one of the biggest problems that the audience has with the movie overall, and with what could be the source of these comments, is the CGI. I mean, there's no getting around it. That's one of people's biggest issues with the film, and I think we should tackle that first. The audience really hates the CGI in this movie. They hate how it's implemented. They think the character design sucks as far as the CGI goes. what say you? I know you alluded to this a little bit before, but let's hear your thoughts on this on the CGI. Is the audience do they make sense here?
No, I once said that this would be one hell of a charming movie if it had been made in the 90s or before. Clearly, the thing holding this movie back is the CGI. It's really clashing with the retro style that this movie clearly wants to embrace. It just clashes in a really ugly way. I think a reason why Frankenstein monster he works really well is because that's not CGI. That's a man in prosthetics, and they're well done prosthetics.
I think the head, part of the head, the inside the head, I think is CGI. If I'm
Well, then you don't even notice it. It's still based on a practical
yes,
in-camera effect. So, I mean, the moments where it's all just CGI, like, I mean, I can't tell you how much I rolled my eyes at the Dracula baby horde scene. I thought that was borderline embarrassing, but it doesn't last very long, thankfully. Um, at the same time, I mean, how much do you want to be a dick about it? Like, this movie came out in 2004. It looks like a movie from 2004. I kind of talked about this with Terminator 3. Either accept that or don't.
I was going to
Either,
bring that up too.
yeah, take it for what it is or don't. It's not like Halloween H2O where they use CGI and these bizarre places where, like, you clearly could have used a practical effect. The vision was bigger than the resources they had. It's sad, but it happens. I really got over it as I watched it because I accepted it as the love letter that it was.
Yeah, and honestly, one of the biggest things that I took away from that complaint was this is a Stephen Sommers movie, and we're coming off of it's a couple of years removed from The Mummy Returns, but look back at the CGI in The Mummy Returns, man, that's not received well.
Look back at the Mummy.
The Mummy worked well because every character in The Mummy worked well for people, and highlighted by Brendan Fraser. I think that's why people feel the way that they do. The one thing that I will say about this one that we also said about Terminator 3 was this, like, there are moments where it takes you out of the film, and there are moments where it makes you laugh, and there are moments where it makes you roll your eyes that don't look great. But we do have to remember when it came out. I mean, it does, like you said, it looks like a movie that came out in 2004. Terminator 3 looks like a movie that came out in 2003.
Yeah.
It's not completely out of the realm of what happened during that time. I think it all comes down to Stephen Sommers being overly ambitious, and truthfully, with a movie that becomes divisive, I would rather the director be super ambitious than have zero ambition at all and just not want to be there making the film.
Yeah, that's why it doesn't offend me. Like, clearly he loves this world so much that he can't stop himself from just making it bigger and bigger.
Yeah, and there's also, like, the stories of misguided ambition too. Like, the
Mhm.
biggest example that I think of with that is, and I can compare it to this because it came out only 2 years after, but Kurt Whitmer's Ultraviolet, starring Mila Jovovich,
Which I've
is a
never seen.
perfect example of, like, a film that just it knew the limitations of the time, and it said, "Fuck all that. We're just going to do something crazy anyways." And that movie is not well regarded. It sits at like a 1.9 or a 1.8 on Letterboxd. So I think this has the Stephen Sommers charm, even with the bad CGI, and for that reason, I do think the audience is fair to say that it has not aged well. But I don't know if they're fair to I don't know. Obviously, everything is subjective. You take everything the way that you take it personally. But for me, it's not something that completely takes away from the entire film. I think the ending could have been a lot cooler with less CGI, but that's the case with a lot of movies, even a lot of them nowadays. So, yeah,
Yeah, I think you're right
overall,
about that.
it's fair. It's a fair criticism to say it doesn't age well, but I personally do not agree with the assumption that it is a huge detraction from the film. Um, which I guess leads me to my next, or to the next point that we put here in the ugly section, which is the bad acting and the accents. um, People did not like the acting from our ensemble, our cast here. People did not enjoy it, and people really didn't like the, as you said earlier, questionable Romanian accents. What are your thoughts on this? Is this a valid criticism? Do you think this is something that that
Look,
detracts from the movie for you?
my fiance is literally Romanian. She was born
Oh
there.
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she grew up here, but she goes back a lot, and she speaks the language fluently.
That's
She,
awesome.
yeah, it is. So I'm qualified to say, stop complaining, everybody, please. Oh my God. None of you give a fuck about what Romanian accents and culture really actually is. Okay. It's just an easy shot to take at this movie. Kate Beckinsale is good at a lot of things. She's good at, you know, being a badass. She's good at being sexy. Is she great at Eastern European dictation? No, that's not at the top of her resume. I don't care. I don't. I
It's
just,
passable, I
it's
think.
fine. It's like, and when it is bad, it's like fun to kind of point it out, and there seems to be a good humor to it. Again, there's like a wink, wink, like you go back and watch those Universal monster movies, like the gypsies in those movies. I'm just saying, like, I mean, I don't want to get these movies canceled, but that's not exactly a good representation of that culture.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how far I should take this.
Take it as far as you can. Do it.
So being a fan of Western films, you get a complaint a lot about a few things. In spaghetti westerns, you get a complaint about American accents from the Italian actors. It's never good when they do let the Italian, basically like spaghetti westerns, they just let the actors speak whatever language they wanted to, and then they
Mhm.
dubbed over it if they wanted to, or they didn't. But there were some times where like this is supposed to be like it's like the Jean-Claude Van Damme effect. You know what I mean? Like he's playing Guile in a Street Fighter, but he sounds like Jean-Claude Van Damme still. He has the way of talking that is very European and stuff, and that's how he talks. So in this, it didn't bug me because first of all, I have never been to Romania. I have never met
Neither
somebody
have
from
I.
Romania,
Yeah.
and I have never heard somebody from Romania talk. And I think this did not ever cross the line to where like there's a very good shining example of bad accents in movies with Keanu Reeves in Dracula. Just awful, awful English accent. I mean,
Now that one is
awful.
painful.
Yes,
That one is
that's.
painful.
I don't think any accent in this movie, any of them, even the
Well,
worst of them.
because that's not just a bad accent, that's a bad performance.
Yes, that's the difference that this film has. I
This
think the
is
bad acting criticism is wrong, but the
Mhm.
bad accents criticism is fair.
But those are two different critiques, to be honest. I mean, she emotes well. She communicates the motivation and inner thoughts of her character very well. She's very believable, and she's sexy. Okay, Hugh Jackman is sexy. Kate Beckinsale is sexy. I'm gonna keep saying that because there's no critique you can lobby at this movie that cannot be defeated by pointing out that Kate Beckinsale is sexy.
I mean, hey, I'm not going to disagree with you. I also think that she's just, like you said, I think she's just a great actress. Like when you watch her, everything else about her performance is spot on. I mean, everything about it. Her
Well,
facial expressions are good.
yeah,
Her
I mean,
everything.
what's really cool is that she's not the love interest. I mean,
Well, she is the love interest, but she's not just the love
she is
interest.
a love interest, but her place in the story is much bigger, and
Yes.
she's much more proactive. She's much more competent. She's arguably more skilled at this than Van Helsing is. Um,
Yes.
and that's where their attraction to each other stems from. They are very similar in that department. So it's a great change of pace. Kate Beckinsale, she is you know, she holds her own. with Hugh Jackman. She hasn't let him steamroll her, not as not as the actor and not as the character. So I personally love their chemistry. I think they bring a real spark to the movie. And everybody else, like Carl, is awesome. I won't have you tell me otherwise.
Just amazing. I think he's the best in the film. I love Kate Beckinsale. I think this is pretty much like her film in a lot of ways. But Carl's the hero, man.
He steals the scene and he steals the show in a lot of ways.
Why does it smell like wet dog in here? just always coming in with the quips, man. He's so great.
Yeah, he's awesome. And then Hugh is fine. I mean, I can't see why people would think he's bad. I know I think he's a little dry, but that's not a big problem.
And even the side characters, man. There's a few performances here and there that are just like not great, but if they're not great, they're not there long. Yeah. The one of the vampire wives that could act the best was the one that lived the longest. So like they did it right.
Yeah. And now obviously Dracula is super handy. And for a lot of people, that's just going to register as bad. People are going to think it's just a bad performance. It's not. It's a very campy performance that belongs more in a Sam Raimi movie or something. I was rewatching Army of Darkness, which is an amazing film. It's one of the best films ever made, really, if we're being honest with ourselves. But I was also thinking, like, man, I bet you so many people, if this movie came out today, so many people would call it dumb. They would say the acting is bad. They would say Bruce Campbell is hammy. They would say the plot doesn't make sense. I mean, it doesn't, but like the fact that people would really get worked up about that is a sad state of affairs to me. And I guarantee you, man, everybody who shits on Rob Zombie's The Munsters would have said that about Army of Darkness had it come out in the year of our Lord 2022.
I'm not going to say anything good about Dracula, but I am going to say I agree with that. I agree with that it's a hammy performance. I see it as bad because I don't like it, but that does not mean that I am the authority on that. I think your opinion is much more valid.
I mean, you don't think he did a bad job, do you? Like the actor just failed.
I feel he did, but that's, again, I don't know how much of that is stemming from the fact that I just hate it. I hate the portrayal, you know? Like I said, I really like the actor. I hate the portrayal so much. Nothing about it works. So I don't think I'm the right person to ask for that. I think your opinion on it is much more level-headed because it's coming from a place of understanding, but it's also coming from a place of understanding on the other side of it. So I would agree with what you said there, despite my opinions on the Dracula character. And I would agree with that for a lot of the bad performances we see in this from other characters who are much smaller in the story, like the other two vampire wives. I don't think they're the greatest, but I don't think they're the worst either. They do fine. They're not in the movie much. They don't get all the lines. There's a reason that there's one that's kept alive, and it's the one that can act the best, and I think she does a great job. So yeah, I think that's that one we can move on from. I think we discussed that pretty well. And that leads us to our final point in this section, which is that it's just a mess of a movie. The story, the script, I mean, people just think this is a mess overall.
Let's stick
that's
to
accurate.
No, it's not. But let's stick to the plot because I think that's what people really need.
Yeah.
Technically, this is a very well-made movie in a lot of regards. And if you think this is not well made, then guess what? J.J. Abrams isn't a good director. Robert Rodriguez isn't a good director. Like, this movie does not commit a more cardinal sin than an over-reliance on green screen and CGI in a time when that was just inescapable. I mean, I was talking about Sam Raimi. Look at the first Spider-Man movie, one of my favorite movies. Some of the CGI in that is frankly cringeworthy, and that is okay. That's fine. So just looking at the plot, it's overly a lot of things, and it tries too hard in a lot of ways, but it's not a mess. Van Helsing has a character arc. There is a backstory with him in Dracula. I don't know how much I like it, but I can't say that the screenplay doesn't do the job in terms of getting that story across. And I've already said I think it's a very clever screenplay in a lot of ways. I think there's a number of times where it pleasantly surprised me and kind of subverted a lot of expectations in the right way. So I will sympathize with the audience, but I'm not going to agree. I'm not going to call this movie a mess.
Yeah, I can also sympathize with where people are coming from on that, but I always like to think of it like this. Let's say, for example, you have like, I don't know, 5 rooms in your house, right? You have 5 rooms in your house, one of them's a mess. Is your house a mess? No, just that room's a mess. There's things about this that are messy, and I won't deny that. There are things about this that
good.
are a bit of a mess. But that does not mean the movie as a whole is a mess. And I think I could see where somebody would say, okay, there are things that are messy about this, and the things that aren't messy I don't like, therefore it's a mess. I could see how somebody could land on that conclusion. But I can't, like, I wouldn't be able to understand, for example, if somebody did enjoy a good bit of this movie but ended up going the other way because they think it's a mess. I can't see that perspective. It's not a perspective I can bring myself to. I can see admitting that there are faults and that there are messy bits of the movie, but I don't think the movie as a whole is a mess. I think there's a lot of things that really do work, like you talked about. So the exact same thing you said at the end there. I can sympathize with the audience and where they're coming from in that point, but I do not at all agree with that point. I don't think it is a mess overall. I think there's just one. Maybe they need to clean up their bedroom a little bit, but every other room is looking good.
Yeah, it's very much like a kid that cleans up his room by stuffing everything in the closet.
That's kind of what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a mess. If you open the closet door, there will be a mess, but I ain't opening that closet door. I'm just taking this for what it is,
Yeah.
And look, the other thing is I am totally a guy who is very comfortable with acknowledging flaws and looking past them.
Yeah.
If you've won me over with the tone of your movie or the theme or even just the lead performance, I'm I'm a very forgiving viewer, and some people might say it's like being in an abusive relationship. Like, yes, I'll stick around even if, the movie is a little taking advantage of me, but that's okay. It's what I signed up for.
Yeah. It's there are movies that are sort of toxic in that way. I'm using that word because that's what people
Okay.
would say in a relationship sense,
Right.
but you have this relationship with this movie where, like you said, you can forgive a lot of the sins where other people can't, and people may not understand that. But at the end of the day, that's what makes it yours, and that's what made it your pick today.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to see, because we've covered the points of the bad and talked about where the audience stands. I want to know where your final stance on this is. I want to know where you landed at the end of this.
Yeah.
What's
And
your
I
final
will,
verdict?
I will happily tell you, and I will be transparent. This is as subjective as an opinion could be. So I'm not rating this as like this is not film school. I'm talking about how much I enjoy watching this movie. For me, this is like almost a movie that was made for me. It was made by somebody who understood both the appeal of the Universal monsters and understood the medium of film. This was made by a cast who, except for Hugh Jackman, who's more the straight man, all played their parts with relish and affection and really let loose. And for me, it's always great to see actors just have fun with characters. I know to some people that doesn't matter, but for me, that really just helps add to this atmosphere of a really affectionate tribute to movies that I love. That being said, it's not a retread of those classic tropes. This is actually a very clever reinvention, and it's a clever modernization. And it has interpretations of these characters that honestly, some of them rank quite highly for me. So even though the action is sloppy, even though the mythology is convoluted, and even though Hugh Jackman wasn't the best casting in the world, I have to say, I really think that Van Helsing is actually good. It is actually good. And I think anybody who likes the Universal monsters owes it to themselves to give this a chance.
That's an interesting perspective on it, and I'm really excited that you landed on it because I worried about it, because it's one of those movies that when you brought it up, I was worried that it was one that you hadn't revisited in a while, because that's where the perspective I came from was. So I was worried that you sort of came from the same place and that's where you would land. But seeing that you have a different history than me and you landed at this point, I'm really happy about that because getting into my final verdict, I got to say, not having watched this movie in 10 plus years, the fact that you put it in this slot and I got to watch it again was honestly like I really needed it, because it's a movie that looking back, this was such a huge part of my childhood. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I watched it monthly for several years of my life. That's a lot of viewings if you don't know that. So it's one of those things that going back, it just made me happy watching it. And I'll say this, watching it as an adult, there is a lot more that I saw during this viewing that I had problems with, and I was finding myself complaining while watching the movie about some of the decisions that were made. However, when I got done with the film, it just like 99% of them all just faded away, man. It's like I don't know if it's nostalgia that's snapping the fingers like Thanos and just making him disappear, or if it's just the fact that the movie's just fun from start to finish. But I can never see myself disliking this movie. I could never see it happening. I could never see myself saying that it's that bad. I could never see myself saying that a 2.6 is nearly justified. It's actually good. It's actually
Hell
good.
yeah.
Uh,
Hell
I thought
yeah.
I thought for a bit, during the watching of this movie, and it's why I didn't write it down and I wanted to kind of chat about it first because I think I just expected it to live up to my childhood expectations and it didn't. When you're a kid, you don't watch a movie the same way as you do when you're an adult. But at the same time, it still hits that happy place for me and it still hits on the beats that it needs to hit on. It does everything it needs to do for me. It does some things wrong, but I'm willing to forgive those things, like you said, to enjoy myself watching this. And I think this is one of the easier movies to do that with. I don't know how anybody could passionately hate this movie. Seeing some of the reviews, there are people who just absolutely hate this thing like I hate the movie Mama. I don't get that. I don't see how that's possible. So it's actually good. I'm happy to put it there. Sorry, this may not have been as I guess well stated as some of my final verdicts go usually, but this is not a movie that I can talk about easily because it does mean so much to my
Look,
childhood. So
I mean, if it comforts you, uh, I have no nostalgia for this movie. I watched it as a 24-year-old man, and I still really enjoyed it. I quite adored it, really. And I'm so tired of the people who just sneer at this movie, at this labor of love. So I had to defend it. And honestly, after I think this movie is art compared to a lot of the blockbusters that we've received in the past 10 years, right? And this is the best that these classic characters are probably going to get, at least for the foreseeable future. Nobody is going to have the budget or the genuine passion to pay respect to these characters again. So, yeah.
yes, and I now hope that now that we know that this is kind of being rebooted, I hope that the new filmmakers can pay it justice.
Sure.
Fingers crossed on that. Either way, I want to thank you for picking this movie and giving me a chance to go back and revisit my childhood, because I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I'm one of those people who's just so steeped in nostalgia that just like it's part of the reason why I love something like Star Wars and Halloween so much, is that Yeah, my childhood was such a great time for me, So now getting back to, my roots of watching films. This is one of the films that helped build who I am today. So as weird as that sounds, I love the fact that I got to revisit it. So I want to thank you a lot, buddy, for picking it out.
Well, it is so cool how it worked out. I saw this movie and I thought it'd be perfect for the podcast, and it turned out you had this whole history with it. So it worked out better than I could have hoped, honestly. And we came at it from two completely different perspectives, two completely different histories, and we wound up with the same verdict. So to me, that makes this kind of one of the most successful movies on the podcast in terms of how we both feel about it and kind of agree on it. So hell yeah, Van Helsing, check it out. Let's get that sequel going. Hugh, I know you're out there, buddy. I know you're listening.
He's not listening.
So
I don't care how big we get.
When you're done digging up Wolverine's grave, can we get that Van Helsing sequel? Come on, buddy. Just make it happen.
Yeah, I agree. Go out and watch this if you haven't watched it yet. Just have fun with it. Don't go in expecting an Oscar movie. Don't go in expecting anything less than the enjoyment that The Mummy gave you, but with a bit of a different twist on it. So please go watch this if you haven't watched it. Even if you watched it before and didn't like it, if you thought some of our points were good, please go back and revisit it. And that's where I think we should leave it on this movie. What do you think? I think we talked about it pretty well here.
I think we've made it an objective fact that this is a good movie. So I think it's ready to. I think we're ready to close out. All right.
Well,
guys, I have to remind all of y'all that our Patreon has just gone up.
Yes.
Y'all need to go access those exclusive benefits because we already have 2 Patreon exclusive episodes out on Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers and Halloween Resurrection. 2 of our most interesting discussions, and you're going to want to listen to those and access the many other benefits that we're offering on our Patreon. So check it out. We'd really appreciate the support. And yeah, Connor, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, if anybody wants to support our show, we'll have the link for our Patreon in the description of this show on YouTube. But patreon.com/notthatbad is where you can find us. You'll get cool perks like early access to any of our Patreon specials. So for example, we have our 2 Halloween specials up there, part 1 and part 2. Like Gabe talked about here, we're going to have a lot of exciting ones coming up in the future. We've mapped this out over the next couple of months, and man, we got some really cool stuff coming that you're really going to want to access early. So we're really pumped to be bringing you some fun stuff there. And if you subscribe to a certain tier or above, you get a free sticker. So you can rep Not That Bad on your favorite water bottle or laptop or whatever you want to do it on. If you don't want to support us on Patreon, though, that's totally fine. We appreciate the support everywhere, the views that we get on our YouTube channel, as well as the interactions on social media. You can follow us on Twitter at Not That Bad, M as in movie, P as in podcast. Find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching at Not That Bad Pod. Come and interact with us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and subscribe or whatever the version of subscriptions are on all of the favorite podcast platforms that we appear on. Without further ado, though, Mr. Tice, would you take us out, buddy?
Oh, yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for listening in to another really fun episode. I hope you can tell just how awesome of a time that me and Connor had. And I hope that translated to you guys and how much you enjoyed this episode. So be on the lookout for future content. But for right now, I'm Gabe.
I am Connor.
And this is Not That Bad. Signing out.